What happens when you take money out of a Roth IRA? Hi, I'm financial planner Sean Mullaney. Let's discuss. So Roth IRAs, tax-free growth for retirement. Who doesn't love that? But we do want to just make sure we're dotting a few I's and crossing a few T's before we take money out of a Roth IRA. The tax rules say there are two types of withdrawals from a Roth IRA. The first type is referred to as a qualified distribution, and the second type, which is a little more complicated, is referred to as a non-qualified distribution. Let's tackle qualified distributions first. These ones are pretty easy. If you've both attained the age of 59 and 1/2 years old, and you have owned any Roth IRA for at least 5 years, good news. Any withdrawals will be so-called qualified distributions from a Roth IRA. And that's a fancy way of saying it is both tax and penalty free. No questions asked. That money is yours, tax and penalty free. So if you can qualify for a qualified distribution from a Roth IRA, that's a really good thing. Well, all right, that's a qualified distribution. Got that. 59 and a half, 5 years of ownership. Great. What about a non-qualified distribution? That sounds a little scary. It's non-qualified. What's going to happen? Well, there's actually some good news. Many times, non-qualified distributions from Roth IRAs are both tax and penalty free as well. But let's dig into it, okay? So in order to determine the taxation of a non-qualified withdrawal from a Roth IRA, what you need to do is you need to dig into the component parts of the Roth IRA. The tax rules say that any Roth IRA has 3 component parts based on pretty much what was already contributed into the Roth IRA. They are as followed. The first thing in a Roth IRA is old Roth annual contributions, those $6,000 annual contributions, whatever the amount was in each particular year. That's the first component part, what I refer to as a layer. That's the first layer of Roth IRAs. The second layer is all those old Roth IRA conversions you did, whether it's a taxable conversion, backdoor Roth IRA, all that stuff is the second layer, the second component of a Roth IRA. And then the third layer is what I refer to as Roth earnings. It's everything that has grown on the first 2 layers, those old annual contributions and any old Roth conversions. So here's how it works when we're thinking about the taxation of any non-qualified withdrawal. The first thing you have to do is you have to exhaust all your old Roth IRA annual contributions. You exhaust all those for all Roth IRAs prior to withdrawing any old conversions or any Roth IRA earnings. That's really good. So those first withdrawals are always going to be out of old Roth IRA annual contributions, assuming you have those. And those are always tax and penalty free anytime, any reason. Okay? Doesn't mean you should go out and do that, right? It's often great to leave money inside Roth IRAs so it can grow tax and penalty free. But that's really good news. The first dollar out in a non-qualified distribution from a Roth IRA is usually going to be a return of contributions, tax and penalty free, and you've got to get all of those out before you even access the second layer, which is old Roth IRA conversions. Those are always withdrawn from a Roth IRA tax-free. However, they may be subject to that pesky 10% early withdrawal penalty, and the main test there is the 5-year test, right? As long as it's been 5 years since the old Roth conversion, you're withdrawing that layer, that's okay. That's going to get excused from that 10% penalty. But if it hasn't been 5 years, any amount that was taxable when it was converted is going to be subject to that 10% penalty when it's withdrawn inside that 5-year time frame. So want to be very careful around that. And then once all the old contributions and old conversions have been withdrawn, then you get into Roth earnings. And here the news is usually pretty bad. Those are usually going to attract not only income tax, but that 10% early withdrawal penalty, assuming you're under age 59 and a half. So that's something you generally do not want to do. Most people do not want to be withdrawing old or Roth earnings before having a qualified distribution. And by the way, withdrawing money from a Roth IRA before 59 and a half is usually something that should only be done in the context of a very well thought out financial plan, right? Anytime you're taking money out of a Roth IRA when you're not 59 and a half means you're foregoing potentially many years or even decades of tax-free growth, so you want to be very careful there. A few other notes. One is Roth IRAs are not subject to required minimum distributions. This is great. You can turn age 72, age 73, age 74. Guess what? No RMDs, no required distributions. You can let that money grow tax and penalty free for the rest of your life. That is really good. And then another thing just to keep in mind on these non-qualified distributions, they are subject to a tax reporting requirement. They go on the Form 8606, page 2. It's just a reporting requirement, and it does help to figure out whether or not those things are subject to a tax or a penalty. If you ever had to do it, and like I said, you should be hesitant to do it, but if you ever had to do it, hopefully it'll just be a withdrawal of those old annual contributions. Let me know what you think about Roth IRAs in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, please mash that like button, and I'll see you next time.